So, welcome to episode 1 of The Platform. This is a podcast that allows a platform for people to talk on without it being censored or filtered in any way. I worked in mainstream media for about 8 years, close to 10. And usually the concern that I've heard from a lot of people is, I wish I had a platform to speak on that wasn't censored or filtered. So here we are. We just wrapped up January. We are now in February. We wrapped up dry January. And with me today, I have Axel. Axel, I've known for quite some time. We go way back to when we were kids, I would say probably 12 or 13. And our lives drifted apart. But in the most beautiful way, we reconnected. And I have Axel with me today to talk about his journey with alcoholism and sobriety. So welcome, Axel.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So Axel, like I said, we just wrapped up dry January. Alcoholism is something that affects many Canadians. And if you go with Stats Canada, usually the consensus is that alcoholism usually affects men more than women. Tell me a little bit about your childhood, how it started, and basically your journey.
Well, I guess my childhood, in terms of alcoholism, that played a role in my life since the very beginning because my dad was an alcoholic and his dad was an alcoholic. So those statistics actually make sense. I didn't, they've applied to my life the whole time. And so I guess my childhood wasn't necessarily the greatest. My dad was a very abusive, very violent person. And so I saw the ugly side of alcohol since I was a kid. My whole thing was I never wanted to grow up to be like him. And I got pretty close. Not in the terms of the abusive or the violence or anything like that, but in terms of, homelessness and alcoholism and all that. So I saw a lot of violence at home, which then, made me very angry, and I didn't do very well in school either. I feel like I didn't have a lot of the resources there that I would have liked. I always was interested in things like music, things like, I was kind of a nerd. I like to read. I still like to read.
I do remember that. You were a smart kid. You were just
Bad
I
school.
remember you were not, you know what? I don't even know if bad in school is even the term, because sometimes if you don't have the right support, I feel like from what I could remember, you had a lot of energy.
I still have a lot of energy.
Yeah. And, I remember like I was a talkative kid and I remember you were talkative. Like I remember we actually sat next to each other. And we predominantly, I would say, middle school, it was multicultural. But I know like after that, our high school experiences were similar in some ways and also very different.
Very privileged school, very, very white school. I felt like an outcast there. And I also really like to draw. So I was happy that I got that opportunity to be there. And I thought, growing up in, predominantly like low income neighborhoods, I grew up on I was misplaced a lot. We moved around a lot. I was in Jane and Finch. I was in Rexdale. I was living in Dixon at the time when we were in Hilltop. I was in Jungle for a long time. So I moved around a lot. Anywhere that was in Northwest End where the police get called very often, that's where I lived.
And I always, as a kid, just kind of, not to like toot my own horn, but I just kind of got along with, I would say, most people around me in school. And I remember like you would give teachers a little bit of a hard time, but I was just like, he's a cool guy. You were artsy. And I think we also connected because our ethnicities, like I come from an Arab background and, you're Latino, right? So you're Mexican, that's your ethnicity. And I remember that was something that we could like kind of connect on. And then, I didn't know at the time, if like rumor had it, things kind of fly around that you were arrested. And I don't know if that's really when everything kind of catapulted in your life and what led to that, to your alcoholism. But I guess like you can share that. And also I just want to say that this podcast is really laid back. Like we established this earlier. I'm sitting on the couch. I told Axel, chill, take snacks, coffee, whatever. Drink. You don't drink alcohol.
I got my non-alcoholic cider right here, so I'm good. But I guess what I was saying with the ESA thing is that I felt very like an outcast there coming from that background. And I think that that kind of gave me like in school and in with the police kind of like this image. And I believe I was more targeted. So what happened with that arrest, I guess that as rumors had it, it was there was 2 armed robberies, one near my neighborhood, so one on Dixon, and one at a neighborhood that I frequented on La Rose. And the only descriptor that they had was that they were armed men with Spanish eyes. and they had masks. So that was the only descriptor that they had. And they arrested me in front of my mom on Mother's Day, asking me what I was doing 2 months prior to that at 7 p.m. And I'm like, bro, I don't know what the fuck. What were you doing at 7 p.m. 2 months ago? Like, no, why would I know this, right?
And you were how old again at this point?
I was 16.
You were 16. That's young.
Yeah.
That's still considered, I know it's 16, it's teenager, but it's still a child, really.
Yeah. And they wanted me to do 2 years for that. I honestly, to this day, I don't know who did it. It wasn't even one of my friends. It wasn't anybody that I know. But what did happen is that, I was put in jail for 6 months. And because I was in that specialized art school, I got, it wasn't semestered. So I lost the entire year of high school. And when I was finally able to prove that it wasn't me, they were like, oh, well, my bad, here, like, you can leave now. But I didn't have anywhere to go to school. By going to a specialized school, I forfeited my homeschool, so I couldn't go back to that. So basically, my only option, especially because I had to get a better lawyer because legal aid sucks, I had to get a job to pay those fees. So I started working at like shitty warehouses for like minimum wage.
How was your social circle like at that point?
That's the one thing that I like. I mean, I never had money or anything, but I had good people. I think what ended up really making myself and my group of friends spiral was when my friend got killed. He got shot at Buttonwood Park, and that was part of like my main crew. So after that, I think that's what really led to alcohol, drugs, depression, all of that. And
were you already drinking at 16, before 16? Like when did you start drinking, and was it recreationally or was it heavy drinking?
Like culturally, for instance, like I started drinking. My first drink was when I was in Acapulco. I was 13. And like you've been mentioning gender, which I think is important in a lot of cultures too, right? Like my cousin, she would get upset because I was 13 years old. We're the same age. I was going to clubs. I was going to strip clubs. I was drinking. I was doing all kinds of shit, and she wasn't allowed to. You know what I mean? Because she's a woman or she was a girl. And for me, it was seen more like, oh yeah, like that's the whole boys will be boys shit. And in Mexico, it's pretty big, and drinking is part of the culture. We got Pedro Infante, who like would drink whenever he's depressed, whole bottle of tequila with mariachis in the back, and that was considered like macho. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then when you get drunk, you sing Vicente Fernandez, like it's kind of part of being a man, going up drinking tequila. You know what I mean? And when you're young,
for the culture.
Yeah. And I think that is also like machismo and alcoholism is something that's really rampant in Mexican culture. So I think when I was young and doing it, it was seen as like normal and okay. Mm-hmm. But like between the ages of 13 and 16, when my friend was killed, I think I can consider it more like recreational. After my friend was killed, that's when I started drinking, at lunchtime at school, and then like, waking up drunk in the parking lot, like just face down. And that's when things, like kind of really spiraled. And that, drinking led to anger led to fights. And because I already had, kind of like a target on my back from the cops, then it was like a lot easier to get arrested. You get arrested more and more. You get desensitized to authority. So when I go to school and they're like, hey, don't do this because you might get suspended. And I'm like, most of the people that tell me what to do have guns. So I'm not really threatened by you. Authority wasn't a thing for me. Mm-hmm. So I feel like that was kind of like a thing that happened that made everything kind of snowball. And he wasn't the only one. I think he was the only one that really affected it, because like gun violence was something that was happening in our groups of friends, and like we lost some people to that. And we drank because of it. You pour a beer out for your homie that got killed, and then you get wasted.
And did you feel like did any of your teachers ever, did they ever smell it on you? Did you ever get questioned? Because like alcohol, it's interesting, right? Because some people are functioning alcoholics and can, go to work and do everything. And sometimes, people find a way to also make sure that it doesn't draw attention. Like they'll put on perfume or cologne or whatever. And
now
so
that
that
I'm sober, and when I have people that are trying to hide it, I'm like, holy shit, I was not fooling anybody, man. Because like I would go to work that way, I'd do my exams that way. I'd have like a coffee with like amaretto in it. So when I was like, oh yeah, I'm getting away with it, no, I wasn't. Like that shit's like, you can smell that from a mile away. Like it's not.
Yeah. So did any of your teachers ever
I
you
don't think,
know?
I honestly think that the teachers just didn't give a shit. You know
Mhm,
what I mean? They just kind of saw me as like a lost cause. Now it's just they're holding up space. So like
mhm, mhm.
they, there was a lot of times even in like summer school where I'd see them enforcing rules for other people, other kids in the class, and they'd be like, "Well, what about Axel? He's doing it." And she's like, "Just forget about him."
You've been sober for how many years now?
9 years as of January 25th.
Well, that's amazing. We'll talk about how you feel now and everything, but I guess like before we get into that, my question would be, what led you, or when did you realize, okay, there's a problem now. Like I need to seek help. I know you said that obviously you were impacted, and I'm sorry, like by the loss of your friend. I know that must have been really hard. You were also really young, and then you had the racial profiling situation that you were going through. Now you're out of school, you're working at warehouses, but when was it really that you realized, okay, like it's getting really bad now?
Well, your mind can really trick you. So I don't even recall ever thinking or acknowledging that there was a problem. I don't recall ever quitting. That's what I tell people when they ask me like, "Oh, when did you decide to quit?" I'm like, "I didn't." Um, I was at a point where I was sleeping on the subways, and then once the subways closed down, I was sleeping like between the doors at banks or at Islington Station. Between those two doors, you can kind of hit them open and like you can sleep there. Shelters, or if I got arrested, I just sleep in jail or the holding cell. And yeah, so I didn't think there was a problem then. I racked up a whole bunch of debt. I lost a lot of my friends, a lot of my family, just, kind of like was like, you're a lost cause, whatever. And I couldn't hold a job. I got so much panic attacks, and like my body would physically like start trembling, and I'd be sweating if I didn't have alcohol, to the point where I was scared to go into the subway, and I still didn't think I had an issue. Um, then I got a seizure so bad that I got a grand mal seizure. I fell to the ground and I bit my tongue so badly that it caused nerve damage all the way down here, and I felt like I was choking. And I still didn't think anything was wrong with me. I'm like, I just really like beer, And I also did a lot of drugs, but then I quit doing drugs. So I was like, at least I don't do drugs. That's a real problem. Drugs are a real problem. I avoided that, so I didn't
Do
have
you
a
mind me
problem.
asking, like, what kind of, if you're open, not to give any, and by the way, like this podcast, this episode is not to give anyone any ideas. Hopefully, if anything, it helps people on the road to recovery, or
Mhm.
realizing that there's no shame to asking for help, or seeking help, and but also how many challenges that can come with that as well. And Axel's kind of like his testimony hopefully helps inspire some people. But I guess also, like you said, you didn't just deal with alcohol, like there was also drugs. And we have right now fentanyl. There's a lot of, it's a drug epidemic like that we're seeing,
Mhm.
and how it's impacting the youth, and in general, our societies. So like what kind of drugs were you dealing with,
Um, I
if you're
always just
comfortable sharing
no,
that?
no, that's totally fine. Yeah, like when I was going through a really, really abusive relationship, I felt like I couldn't be happy unless I was on MDMA, and she really liked MDMA. Um,
Hmm.
I didn't actually start doing drugs until I was like 19.
Okay.
So MDMA was a big one. Um, and then it's funny, we were talking about this last night, but I was like, oh yeah, I never really had a coke problem. Like, oh well, how often did you do it? I'm like, well, whenever it was available and it was free. And I'm like, that was like every other day. So maybe like 3 or 4 times a week. And so I guess I had a coke thing too. I just didn't. It was always free, so I
Yeah.
didn't give a shit.
Well, it was accessible to you, right?
Yeah.
And I guess that's, would you say that, like, you said that you lost some of your friends, and now some of you said you had, like, you do have a good support system, but at some point did you notice that support system started breaking off a
Yeah.
little bit, and maybe did that contribute at all to what you were
Yes.
going through?
Some of my most supportive people, I felt abandoned by them, but after I got sober, I realized that I wasn't abandoned by them. It was like they had to create boundaries. They kept a distance, and it was like very. I'm very appreciative of that, because that's also, I think, one of the reasons that I thought, okay, maybe I do have an issue, is when I started losing the people that were like always supportive and that I
Mm-hmm.
know that love me, and I'm like, okay, if I piss them off, then I'm doing something wrong.
Mm-hmm. The 25 is when you were admitted to the hospital.
Yeah.
So that's still quite, a few years that you probably were navigating this on your own, I guess you could say, or, at some point you did have your support system from 16 to 25, right? So 25, you get admitted to the hospital. Um, is that like, did doctors, did medical professionals like tell you or advise you, okay, you need help, or like what? How did you realize
Yeah,
like, okay,
after the seizure, the first seizures, which I think weren't actually the first seizures, it was just the first time that someone was there to see it. My girlfriend at the time called an ambulance, and I went to the hospital, and they gave me like a form being like, hey, go search for help, go to this group. And it was like, yeah, it wasn't AA, but it was something along those lines. I had never been to any meeting like that. And I was like, this is bullshit, I'm not an alcoholic. And then my mom just like pretty much was like, please go. I'm like, all right. So I went, and they kicked me out of that group because I told them that I had had seizures, and they didn't allow me to continue that day because of the seizures. They said, we don't want you flopping around in here. And that's like, I quote them. So after that, I was like, okay, fuck this, I'm not coming back. I kept drinking. And then it got to the point where I couldn't eat anymore. Like I couldn't hold like I kept vomiting everything. And then yeah, even water. Like I couldn't drink water. I couldn't drink anything. But the feeling of not having alcohol was so like overwhelmingly shitty that if I puked it up, I'm sorry to be graphic here, but if I puked it up, I'd be like I'd puke it and I just keep drinking. And I'm like, no, get down there. You know what I mean? I'm trying to like push it down there so that it stays in there. It wasn't until like I couldn't even stand up. Like my stomach was so like it was in so much pain, and I couldn't stop vomiting. And I was literally on my way to the LCBO at like 9 a.m. And I couldn't make it. I lived like maybe like a 4-minute walk from it. And then yeah, so I couldn't even do that 4-minute walk. And in my head, I'm thinking, I'm like, shit, they're not even gonna serve me. So I called the ambulance. Finally, I go to the hospital, and the doctor was like, that I had pancreatitis, and he said that in his entire career, I was the youngest person he'd seen with that much damage, and that I wouldn't live to see 30. So that's
and
when
how
it
old
kind
are
of
you
hit me.
now?
I'm 33.
I'm happy that you're here with us, 33
Yeah.
years old. So he said, so that's, I'm sure that was scary to hear, like at 25, like you only
Yeah.
a couple of
That's
years
what
to live
hit me.
essentially is what the doctor's saying to you.
Yeah. That's kind of when I was like, okay, maybe I have a bit of a problem here. And the fucked up thing, and that's what I was getting to, is that your mind will always create these excuses for you. So I was like, okay, he's right. I should slow down. And I gave myself until my birthday, which is March 28th. So from January to March, it was only really three months. Yeah, or 2 months. 3, yeah. That I gave myself to quit. And then I'm gonna drink on my birthday. So I didn't actually quit. I only slowed down. But then once I actually got to my birthday, I felt so much better that I was like, I don't see a point in starting this again. I'm asked a lot by friends who've seen my journey, and they also want to get sober. So they can't see past that wall. Like, if I stop drinking, how am I going to go out? How am I going to have fun? Like that, I couldn't fathom going and like, yeah, and having fun and being with people and socializing without alcohol.
And there's that pressure, like I'm saying, right? Like you
Yeah.
have that pressure naturally here in North America where it's like usually around you. So there is that narrative almost that like, how can someone have fun and socialize without it? But you know, your testimony and many others that you can. And I think, I guess one of the things I was going to ask too is I know that you did a bike ride, so
Mhm.
and that had something to do with your journey as well. So I don't know if you want to share that. I know I'm kind of like drifting off into that, segueing, but you know, just speaking of things that you ended up alternatively doing as part of your journey.
I did 2 bike rides. I did one from Toronto to New York. That was about 900 kilometers. Took me 6 days, and that was to raise money for Rainbow Railroad. And I did it in honor of my friend that was killed, because it was the 10-year anniversary of that. And then for my 5-year sobriety anniversary, and when I turned 30, you know, symbolically, because I wasn't supposed to live that long, I went from Toronto to Banff, and I thought it was suiting to raise money for Toronto Indigenous harm reduction. So we raised 10 grand for that, and we went from Toronto to Banff in 32 days. And you know, we camped outside, and the friend that went with me, Lucas O'Hara, he was I believe 10 months sober at the time. So mine was 5 year, and he was at 10 months, and I believe now that was in 2020. So this would be like his 4th year.
Because that requires a lot of like cardio stamina and just body stamina, let alone mind, to be able to do that. What were your thoughts too, like when you were riding? Did any of that hit you? Like, man, like just a couple of years ago, you know, I don't think I would have been able to do this.
That takes me to like something that my friend said, that really hit me a lot. She asked me, because at that point I had completely changed my life, and she thought that I was over it, as her words were. Like, how did you get over the, like, you know, the deaths and the depression? How did you get over all of these things? And I'm like, I'm not over it. I think about this shit every day. And when I was riding my bike, that was what was driving me. You know what I mean? Like, now it's like, for instance, like my friend who like can't live life anymore. I could do things for him. You know what I mean? Like, in his name. And things like riding to New York or riding to Banff were one of the few first things that I was like, okay, I'm living life. I'm not at a fucking dive bar. It took me a month to ride to Banff. I saw some really beautiful things. I came to a lot of realizations, and I remember pissing away a month at just dive bars with like $10 in my account. I'm like, am I having fun when I was at those bars? Or I spent a month doing that. So when I was thinking was, yeah, it was, that's what I'm saying. Like, it wasn't necessarily fun. A lot of it was really painful, and it wasn't physical. But what drove me was that pain and that depression and all of that. It's just that I feel that addiction and depression are really powerful forces. And if you can harness that energy and put it into something positive, you can do really amazing things.
Let's just take a minute right now to discuss the audio setup. I'm using my AirPods, not sponsored, not an ad for AirPods at all. But on the note of audio, so, you know, we talked for a second there about how you were basically kicked out of school when you were in high school, right? So, or impacted by everything that was happening. But I bring up audio because I want you to share your story about like what you're doing now.
Well, one of the things that I think really helped me out in my sobriety was really delving into music. I was doing construction when I got sober, and then one day I was like, you know what? I want to be happy. I don't want just money. So I went to school for sound design and production, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just knew that I wanted to work in sound. And so now I've been doing sound for film for the past, I believe, 6 years. And again, I think this ties back to like, oh, well, was I having fun before? Am I having fun now? Like, I still go to parties, but now I've traveled to Jamaica, I've traveled to Italy, I've traveled to France, Maldives, Argentina, Brazil, Peru, I think Costa Rica in the past maybe couple of years, 3 years, something like that. Just shooting movies and, you know, doing sound for documentaries, for features. And yeah, I'm living my dream job. I love what I do. I'm excited. I love buying shit. I love this microphone.
Yeah, great audio, by the way. We'll talk about that for the next podcast that I do, the next episode, because you need to teach me all your ways when it comes to audio. You're just looking, you know, reflecting also on your life in terms of like 1 minute you're experiencing homelessness to then, you know, turning your life around and having these opportunities that took work, I would say, probably on your end.
How amazing it does feel to be in these situations is because of how hard it was. You know, like I said, I had to spend time in jail just because I got racially profiled. I've been beaten up by cops. I feel like that story is almost exhausted because that story is not very unique. I know a lot of people that have gone through that because they're Black or they're Arab or they're Latinos. Like, that's just the reality of things. I think that that's also something that has also driven me, right? Because I feel like as a diaspora, I've always been into social justice since I was a child. I always was, you know, since I first read about the Zapatistas, I was like, hell yeah, revolution, you know, my people, la raza, all that. But, you know, how was I making a change when I was sleeping like in shelters, and when I was another alcoholic, and when I was another alcoholic Mexican in jail? I was just fitting a statistic, right? So I felt like if I'm really going to make a difference, it's got to start by being me. You know, like, I'm part of that community. I want to help my community, then I got to be an asset to that community. But I just got my pardon, which was a fucking huge deal for me, because I'm no longer like part of that system.
You know, alcoholism is something that affects anyone from any race, religion, creed. It doesn't matter. But I do wonder if your experiences would be the same as someone who's white, affluent, and who has a certain type of support.
No, I mean, I've seen that a lot, like with people with drug problems who have that kind of support system that can be, you know, not worried that um for things like criminal charges, or because they can get better lawyers, or that, like, they have a support system, for instance, like if they have parents who are willing to help them with some of the debts that they acquire, or if they're like, okay, maybe I want to go back to school, can you help me pay for this schooling? You know what I mean? Like, I had to do everything, and that's why like little things that people to really take for granted, like I couldn't I got my license was taken away. I didn't have enough of a credit score to get a fucking cell phone. So I remember one of the first things of it being reintegrated into society. Like, I feel like that's the toughest part, right? Because if it's someone who's affluent, that's such an easier transition. But for us, it's a lot more daunting, and that makes it depressing, and that makes it less attainable. So if I'm like, quitting to quit drinking or quit doing any substance, it's more than just stop. It's more than just stopping. You know what I mean? It's also having to go back into society, and that's where we don't have the same playing field. Because
Mm-hmm.
like for me, I remember just getting a phone was like a big deal. I had a shitty flip phone Alcatel, and I was like, hell yeah, I'm moving up in life. You know what I mean? And then I remember the first time I got my G1, I got my G1 back, and that was a big deal. And then when I finally passed my G2 test, I was in my mom's car, and I just started crying, man. I'm like, I'm a person,
Mm-hmm.
and like, and every little step was a huge deal for me.
I do want to say, like, I don't want people to get it twisted that people who are whites, have like a smooth sailing ride when it comes to alcoholism or any kind of substance abuse. No, like white people still face their challenges. Like it still takes someone's life away. But I guess my point was affluence, really, and
Yeah.
integrating, like you said, back into society. I think the experiences could be a little different,
Well,
which
yeah,
is
but
what you're touching on.
we also can't ignore the fact that the low income neighborhoods that I was raised in were predominantly not white by a very large margin, and when I was in jail, that was also predominantly not white by a even bigger margin. So the affluence is there, and there's a pattern. I don't know many white people that have been to jail because they matched the description, and the only descriptor was being white.
Yeah, or the eyes.
Or the eyes, yeah, because they didn't even see their face.
What advice would you give to someone who potentially is struggling, and how to overcome it? And the other is society. If you had something like a message to share, hoping for change at all, to help others, what would it be?
Honestly, this has caused me a lot of grief in the last few months, because I have a lot of my friends and people I care about are suffering from addiction. Some of them are dying, ODing, and some of them are on their way. And I don't know what to say to them. And it kills me because I don't have the answers. And they think that I do, because they saw me at my worst and now they see me now. And I don't really have like a way of doing it. I didn't go to AA, but I don't bash it. I'm not religious. But I also think that if you found God and that gets you sober, that's beautiful. Like, go for it. Any way that you can do it, and anything is your journey. And there's not one specific way or one specific formula. Like, mine didn't look like any other people's sobriety that I've heard. That whole idea of like not being able to do it yourself, I don't think that's true. I know that that's a thing that AA says, but I just don't believe that. So I don't know what to say to someone. That's why I want to kind of just share my story, not because like I want to center myself and be like, look, this is my story. It's because I've been asked multiple times by multiple people, just like, what happened? How did you feel? And like, how did you get out of it? So that's kind of why I wanted to share my story. I was thinking about maybe writing a book or something. But as for advice, I honestly, like, I don't know. And
No, I appreciate that. And I appreciate, this is the whole point of this podcast, right? Like, not censored, no filter, which is the reality is what you said, right? And there's no cookie cutter response, or solution.
yeah,
People are
it's complicated.
navigating, yeah, people are navigating it in their own way, and you found a way that worked for you.
In terms of, it's almost crazy. It's almost like sometimes I just want to shake him, and I'm like, look, man, like I promise you, I know how you feel. And I know when you have that like chemical dependency, and like it feels like your throat's closing and you're fucking shaking and you're sweating. And I know what it feels like when you have $20 and you're like, that's like a six pack, and maybe I can get a few patties because I'm not having eaten in 3 days, but you prefer to drink because it feels less shittier to starve to death than it does to be without alcohol. And you know, I know how all of these things feel like, or when you don't know whether or not you've had a seizure and you wake up somewhere and you don't know where the fuck you are, like all of that, I was there. And you know, and I sometimes one of my biggest fears is if I fall asleep and I wake up and all of this shit that I've accomplished so far is not didn't happen. You know what I mean? Because I've done some like with my job, I've like had my own private villa in the fucking Maldives and shit. I've worked with celebrities. I've like, you know, ticked off so many of my life goals, things that I never thought that I would accomplish. My 5-year plan was just to get a car, a shitty Honda Civic. I have it written down. I wanted a shitty Honda Civic and my budget was $2,000. And that was my 5-year plan. I could, that's it's nothing now. You know what I mean? Like, and it's just such a better life. And that's why I'm not tempted to go back, or that's why I'm not tempted to drink. And it's like people are still making like these like mental acrobatics in which like, you know, still go to a dive bar and think that that's fun and think that that's like, you know, I don't know. It's just, it gets so much better. And I wish they could see that.
And you know, your story is just one of many testimonies, and it's not to, and I know you feel the same way based off of what you've expressed. Like, it's no shame if someone is struggling and trying to figure it out, because
Yeah.
as you showed and mentioned, like you went from 16 to 25. Like, it's not like just one day you woke up and got on a bike and
No.
went to New York or went to Banff. Like, it took you something drastic, landing in the hospital, ending probably on the streets, you know, going through certain experiences that you've mentioned. So it wasn't just a simple one day wake up and wanting to change, but you managed to find that. And I'm happy for you. And I'm glad that you're with us to like share your story. It seems like you're a goal driven person. What can we expect to see from Axel moving forward?
I don't know. I think the book was actually a good idea. I'm not in it really for money or anything like that. I don't think that even makes money. I mean, worst case Ontario, I just put my thoughts out there and it would be therapeutic. But like, if it could maybe give people ideas or inspire someone or something like that, or they feel represented in something, then I think that it's worth it. So I've been working on that. I'm going way more into music and just, you know, all of the things that I really wanted to accomplish. I'm just going for it. So yeah, I guess stay tuned for that.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye out. Maybe the next one of our next episodes will be after you write your book. So we'll keep an eye out for that. No pressure at all. But hey, you never know. Like, I do wish you the best, because your story is one I think that should be heard. And I appreciate you for sharing it. And I wish you all the best moving forward. And we'll definitely keep in touch. So thanks for being on the platform today and sharing your story.
Thanks for having me.